Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. And here we have a Chainer Nightmare Adept Forced Combat deck from Noah. Now this video took me a little longer to make than you would expect because I was halfway through recording it and then we lost power for a bunch of hours. So I hope this is a helpful deck assist video because it's taken a lot out of me. Noah sent us this deck, and they say, let me open up their message. I honestly just want it to run a little faster and hit a bit harder. That's uh, that's pretty direct. I do appreciate that. I think that's something a lot of our decks could have. And for deck building restrictions, they said obviously throwing stuff like Mana Crypt would help, but that's a lot for one card. I don't have a hard budget, but I'm hesitant to spend more than $100 on an individual card. This comes up weirdly a lot. I'm just going to take a moment to say this. You are not the first person, Noah, who has told me that they specifically can't add Mana Crypt. And I want to be clear, Mana Crypt is not a card that universally helps decks. I know it's just an example of a really expensive card that's on our minds, but I would really hate for all of you to win the lottery next week and then spend that money on Mana Crypts. Like there are generally better, cheaper cards that can be added to a deck, many of which I will save for this deck, that, will go a long way further than just a Mana Crypt. But as we get into it, as always, the deck list for this video will be in the video description below, and I highly recommend, taking a look, looking at our old pal Chainer and how he's changed, and seeing, if you have any suggestions. I've got a friend who plays a forced combat deck, and I'm sure he would have some suggestions. So be like him, suggest some things. So, so who is Chainer Nightmare Adept and why are we using them in this deck? Chainer Nightmare Adept is a 4 mana black-red human minion and a 3/2. He's got two main abilities. The first one is when you can discard a card, pick a creature card in your graveyard, and you may cast it this turn. You can only use this ability once per turn. And then the second ability is whenever, I'm just going to summarize it, whenever a creature enters play and you didn't cast it from your hand, it has haste. That's really, really important. So Chainer is a bit of a reanimator, build, or a commander, but not in the ways we traditionally think of reanimator commanders. Like, for example, when you and I sit down, we might think of casting the spell Reanimate on a very big creature like Shieldred, or you can see here Sisters of the Undead. But Chainer doesn't really work like that. Chainer forces you to pay, like you have to play fair. You have to pay the full mana cost of the card you want to reanimate. In exchange, you get to give it haste, and of course, you just get to reanimate a creature each turn. So there is this element of fairness to him. So he works a little more like a strong mid-range commander. But here we have a forced combat deck. For those who are not familiar, forced combat decks are decks that use a lot of, let's use Fumiko as example, a lot of cards that either goad or force your opponent's creatures to attack. These decks tend to, either give people creatures to attack each other with or benefit from all the attacking that's going on by using cards. I think this is a strong direction to take the deck. I think Chainer works really well in a deck like this because Chainer offers a way to get regular advantage through combat. You can start attacking with creatures, you can lose creatures, and a lot of these creatures that you have are going to be kind of essential to your game plan. So the fact that Chainer can rebuy these creatures from your graveyard is really, really good. So with that in mind, let's start by looking at the curve. I think the curve here is really, really nice. I think it has a nice little 1 to 6 here. And at 6 mana, we just have two particularly strong creatures. And at 5 mana, we've got a slew of strong creatures. I think the creatures are one of the strongest parts of the deck. There's a few outliers that I think are a little weaker than others, but on the whole, I think the deck itself, creature-wise, is built very strongly. Um, I think I just have so the goal was to make the deck faster and hit a bit harder. So with that in mind, we've got a few cards that I think we can improve on. Cards like Baleful Mastery are political cards that can help, you know, get a favor from one opponent to exile another creature. But I don't think it really belongs here because we're playing a forced combat deck, and with that in mind, giving a person a card kind of is antithetical to our main game plan. Now, that might not be true because we could be drawing them into a creature to put on the battlefield, but we could also be drawing them into removal, a board wipe, things that are really kind of against what we want to do. So I like, on a deck that's not very political based, I like erring on the side of caution and using a card just like Infernal Grasp instead. A nice destroy target creature, you lose 2 life. In the same way, because we're in black red, another option is Terminate. Terminate is, a really undervalued card, but it just really cleanly destroys a creature at 2 mana, which is really nice. Or Dreadbore is often the other one because at sorcery speed, but you can destroy planeswalkers. Now, I prefer those cards to Murder because Murder is unfortunately too much mana. I prefer them to Soul Shatter. Soul Shatter Soul Shatter is really, really close to being playable, but I don't think it belongs here. You actually have pretty low control over what you're hitting, even with the caveat that it's going to be the highest CMC cost. And if you're playing this deck and someone drops like Inferno Titan or like, I don't know, a big dragon, do you want to destroy that or do you want to goad that? And I know it can be tricky because some really big drops will interfere with this plan, but I think that's what your targeted removal is like. The fact that Soul Shatter misses out on, you know, a lot of smaller creatures that are very detriment to your plan, a lot of defensive creatures, or, just like a Dark Confidant here or a Giver of Runes there, like cards that, gain a lot of value by staying on the field and not getting too deep into combat if they can help it. I think I think is kind of a problem with this card. If you want something like this, Innocent Blood is 2 mana less without the selection. And though that 2 mana does, like the fact that you can't get the biggest thing does hurt, I think it is the efficiency of this spell is that its strongest point. Is that you're getting 3 cards off the battlefield, 4 is one of your own, but you can, you have control over it, so you can play around it. So I'm kind of keen on lowering the mana cost. I don't think you're going to notice a difference that much. Likewise, sudden spoiling also feels weird. Sudden spoiling is this really gotcha card that when it works feels really, really, really good, and the rest of the time it just feels really, really bad, right? Um, there's like a lot of scenarios that we can imagine that it's really strong in, but sometimes it's just darkness, right? Which I will put here. Darkness is, oh, sorry, there's several darknesses. Darkness is just prevent all combat damage that we dealt this turn, right? Your opponent attacks you with everything, you cast sudden spoiling, bam, you've created, you've stopped the attack from coming. Yeah, you're able to maybe block and destroy some of those creatures, but not guaranteed. I think considering the amount of goad you have, I might let it go, but I think it's close. Sudden spoiling is just sometimes not a card that does anything. Your enchantments look really, really good. I like the inclusion of Phyrexian Arena and Greed. I like Sign in Blood here. I like Night's Whisper. I think you have a good amount of what I would consider to be card draw in black that you have access to. And Faithless Looting, though not technically card advantage, with Chainer it is there. It functions as a card advantage. I really like that. And you have one Demonic Tutor, which honestly I feel is a little overkill. I don't think this deck desperately needs it, but at the same time, not going to complain. You're in black, play a Tutor. I think it's the right thing to do. Okay, what do I feel is missing though? And looking over here is where I notice some things. Um, Namely, we definitely are not playing enough mana rocks here. You have a 4 mana, 2 color commander that benefits from coming out early. Not as much as other cards, but once your commander is out, every subsequent turn you can start reanimating things. I think it's generally accepted that it's going to be difficult for you to play Chainer and then immediately reanimate something. You don't have any 1 drops, you start off at 2. And with that in mind, I think it's just going to be a lot more likely that you want to play Chainer turn 3, and then starting turn 4, you can start reanimating cards right away. With that in mind, I think the two you should play for sure is Rakdos Signet, which is our classic Signet, and then Talisman. Are you playing the Talisman? I feel like I saw it. Yeah, you are playing Talisman of Indulgence. So the next one would be Felwar Stone, which is also a very strong one. You're playing the Arcane Signet, and after that, if you really wanted, the next one I would suggest would be probably the Diamonds, maybe. Oh, you can't just search that. Sorry, Diamond. They're not the best because they come in tapped, but more likely than that, Charcoal and Fire Diamond are definitely playable in a deck like this, and allow you to get your commander out on turn 3. You can even go down 1 or 2 lands for them. I wouldn't go further than that, but your curve is already really nice, and I don't think you're going to have a lot of problem casting your spells. I am going to suggest a few things to make you more mana, because this deck does benefit from having a lot of mana, but not in the way that like a ramp card, like a mana rock or an extra land will do. What I mean by that is this. On your turns, I think one of the ideal plays you can do is use your commander, discard a card, reanimate a creature, and then play another creature from hand. That's like a really good place to be. And for that, you need to get closer to like 8 to 10 mana because you want to play 2 bigger creatures. And it's not so much, having extra mana here or there to make that difference. There's some situations like, being able to Madness Big Game Hunter, cast I don't know, Liliana Standard Bearer, and Cardur all in the same turn. It gets rather expensive, but when you have that mana collection, it's very doable. So that's the first 2 suggestions I'm going to make. Curse of Opulence is a particularly strong card. It is another way to gain incentive for your opponents to attack each other, because at the start of the game, you won't have your goad engine going, but you want those attacks to already start going. You want your opponents to ping each other. And Curse of Opulence is very much so underrated by a massive margin, because I think people read the first part, or they reread it in the way that says whenever you attack, Curse Deck Builder, you get a gold token. And they think that for each of their opponents, that's just the same. But you have to remember that this makes you the gold token every time that player is attacked, in addition to giving it to the attacking player. So you get one when you attack, and when your opponents attack, you still get one and they get one. This is very quickly, like, this can be ramp, especially with goad. This can, like, the ideal way is that you get 3 gold from it every turn. It's not guaranteed, but it is feasible. And getting 3 gold per turn cycle, where opponents get 1 gold each, so 3 gold versus 2, is you getting ahead. And I think it's definitely worth playing here. The other one that's a little higher mana, but I think also very feasible in a deck like this, is Black Market. Black Market says whenever a creature dies, put a charge counter on Black Market. And then at your pre-combat main phase, you get that much black mana. Traditionally, this is used in Aristocrats decks, but I find it gets too much attention when you're doing that kind of strategy. People people ping this out, and the way aristocrat strategies already work is that you've got a collection of weak creatures or creatures that sacrifice themselves, and then you play black market and you're doing the thing, you're really open to attacks, and people are going to start pressuring your life total because it becomes evident that you're going to get the mana advantage really, really fast. Whereas I like black market in a deck like this, where black market just generally benefits from the combat and the mischief on board. And with that in mind, it allows you to get even more advantage so that when it comes back to your turn, yeah, everyone knows about black market, but they've been busy choosing their attacks on each other. They've been busy dealing with, 6 damage coming at them every turn or more. I think this is something like forced people forget about forced combat decks. I recently played against one of them, and it is incredibly distracting that I'm being attacked so often by such large numbers, right? It's not something that it's really hard to kind of turn to the goading player and say, hey, stop that, because oftentimes by the time it gets to that combat, the goading has been done, right? I turn and I see the guy next to me turning and going, well, I guess I got to attack cursed. And like, there's 10 damage coming towards me. I can't be mad at the at the goading player. I'm mad at the goaded player, and I don't have a chance to really think about black market. I'm just trying to stay in the game. So all that to say, I think the black market will really flourish in this kind of situation, give you a lot of mana advantage, and since that mana advantage literally turns into more creatures on board or cards like Greed, where you can just turn that straight into card draw, I think it's going to be very, very good here. All right. The next thing I would like to point out, trying to pick which one next, is I want to suggest two cards that I think is something that's missing here. I think it's called Lightning Rager. I could be wrong. Yes. So one of the things that's really important about Goad decks that sometimes is lost is that you need to be giving your opponents things to attack with. And these things have to be somewhat meaningful. So this is the classic one that I'm always a big fan. I'm going to be a little I'm not going to be so quick to suggest this because I just suggested a 5-mana enchantment. So let's be careful with how much we increase the curve. Um, Granted, let's look at your 5-mana slots. Um, if you really wanted, you could be picky with some of these, but regardless, Rite of the Raging Storm is just really good because it just starts passing out 5/1s. And these 5/1s are fantastic, right? They come out, they attack each other, they can't attack you, but you get one as well. In addition to having their board goaded, they're also going to have a 5/1 to swing with. That increases the damage incredibly quickly. Now, there's a bit of a problem with these traditionally where if your opponent has, I don't know, a Baneslayer Angel or any like big wall or like a 6/6 Baileyth or something like that, the lightning ragers just do nothing because they just smash into a bigger creature. And if the other players, agree upon it, they can just purposely do that to stop you from gaining advantage. But that really changes when you're able to goad the entire board or force combat. And all of a sudden, that 6/6 that could have blocked the Lightning Rager is in a situation where it has to attack, is tapped, and can no longer block the Rager. The ceiling on this card is that every turn cycle, you do 20 damage to your opponents. Now, 15 of that damage you have little control over, but 5 of it you have a lot more control because you get to attack with your own and send it in a direction. But still, that's a lot of damage per turn cycle, and that stuff can add up. So, though I am not going to necessarily just say play this card, I'm pretty close to just saying play this card. I know it's an enchantment, and we tend to be thinking of creatures in this kind of deck, but remember, you just have to think of it as a creature because on their next upkeep, on your opponent's upkeep, it's already creating 5/1s, it's already gaining value. So That's one to suggest. But I also have another one, which is Hunted Horror. Now, Hunted Horror I like a lot more, and this is really the one I want to suggest for the deck. Hunted Horror does not get enough credit for how strong it is. Um, People don't play it in Commander because they look at the 3/3s and they look at the 7/7 and they go, why am I playing this? I'm just opening myself up to being attacked. And 7 power, 6 power total, like it's just almost a stalemate. At 40 life, it's meaningless. But that is not how you play this card. You play the Hunted Horror and you turn to the table and you say, who would like some 3/3s? And the rule is whoever gets the 3/3s, you know, they just can't attack you with them. I think this is really strong. I think 90% of the time you're going to find someone who wants to play your game. If you know you've won the last 4 matches or 4 games with Hunted Horror and you play it and you look around, maybe the table will be a little not as kind to taking the centaurs. But even then, you're happy for them to have it, you know. Those centaurs can still be goaded. So at the end of the day, even if they play the centaurs, look at you and go, I'm sending them at you every time, you're probably going to be okay. You're probably going to take a few hits for a few turns, but eventually, once the goading starts, you're just going to get ahead. And I think that's pretty reasonable. I think a little while ago, Saffron Olive made a video talking about the hunted cards. I think it was like a podcast or something. And that really changed my mind on them. When you think of this card as 13 power instead of 7 power, I think it really shows the strength of this card. So not only is it a very reasonable, strong card by itself, you know, by doing so much, it is really cheap to reanimate with Chainer, which is the other reason I want you to play it. If you can find a way, like as soon as you have a Chainer out, you can run this horror into anyone. Just start swinging out. Eventually, it's going to die either through removal or through blocking, and then you're just going to cast it again and put another pair of centaurs on the board, which once again are another pair of creatures to be goaded and forced to attack other players. I think this is really, really good. I think you should absolutely play this. And I think if you are playing a forced combat deck, you should play this card. It doesn't matter which flavor, as long as you have black mana, play this card. That's my hot take. Um, then I have one more enchantment and then a few creatures that I think you would benefit from playing. Warstoll is just something that I think you should play. This is something that I just believe should belong in forced combat decks. Um, I know I just said that. This is different. I think this is just a beneficial card. It's not it's not as shiny as people think it does, but it does really solve a lot of problems. So whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, tap all lands that player controls. What that means is outside of mana rocks and creatures, every time your opponents tap, they tap out. That can be really good against blue players, but be aware this isn't a clean answer. They can still play a land after the fact, but it is pretty close. With War's Toll, you are pretty good at preventing people from playing on other players' turns, which is generally how people get around the forced combat thing, either by flashing in their creatures, either by using removal at the right time to get around a hard block or a goad, things like that. So this just turns this off. Then the other one that says if creature opponents controls attacks, all creatures that opponent controls attack if able. This is really good because this makes a singular goad into a complete goad. Now, that those other goaded creatures don't have to attack, like can attack you, but it does force the attack. And that can set you up for some good, like some beneficial blocks. This is how you get rid of cards such as Thalia, such as, you know, Dark Confidant in situations where you can't directly goad them, or if you've goaded them, your opponents will not block them. Sometimes this allows you to force the attacks to come your way, which can be beneficial at times. But regardless, this card just does a lot for 4 mana, and I think you should just run it. All right, so I've got 4 creatures here. They're all on the higher side of mana, but I think they're worth considering. This one is Baileyth, Barditil, Entertainer. This is the other card I would be considering instead of Black Market. So what it says is all creatures opponents control with power less than this card are goaded. So they're constantly goaded. Now, that's not all creatures. It does have only 2 power, so you have to find a way to pump that. But if you use it in addition with something like Warstoll, like I said before, one goaded creature means the entire board attacks. But the main reason you're using this creature is for the second ability, which says whenever a goaded creature uh, dies, whether it's attacking or blocking, you create a treasure token. So I probably should have said this card right after Black Market because it's really, really close. But I forgot. So here we are. This is really close to Black Market. The pros are that this is a creature, which means your commander can reanimate him, and that this gives you any color mana instead of just black mana. On the other hand, Black Market is not a creature, so it's harder to interact with by your opponents. It doesn't care if the creatures are goaded or not for them to count, which can really matter with other incidental destruction of creatures, but it only gives you black mana. I think in a pinch, I'll probably lean towards Black Market, but I would feel wrong not mentioning this card because I think it's close. And I don't think you want to play both, but there could be a world that you would. So I would consider that. The next one I'm going to do for cards for adding a little bit of oomph is Frontier Warmonger. Once again, this is a 4 mana card, so it kind of competes with your commander. So I would be a little selective here. But Frontier Warmonger is deceptively strong. I think the only thing that would make things better, like one of the things that makes Goad really, really strong, is turn after turn, everyone is constantly tapped out. And because they're tapped out of their creatures, they just take the brunt of the next hit. But that's not always universally true, right? The ability to play creatures that can't attack, such as defenders, the ability to play creatures after the fact, after combat, so they don't have to attack or are summoning sick, the ability to blink creatures or vigilance creatures, all kind of mess with that math. And Frontier Warmonger fixes that problem completely. It gives all creatures that attack your opponent's menace and makes blocking an absolute nightmare. Because that's the really weird thing about a forced combat deck is you actually don't want blocks. I know I just talked about Black Market that loves blocks and the commander, but that's not the ideal scenario, right? If they're blocking, your opponents are still alive, but if they're not blocking, most likely they're going to be really, really low health. And Frontier Warmonger allows that to happen. There's still going to be blocks and they're still going to lose creatures, but it's going to be a lot harder to do so. So I think this is a very strong inclusion. I think it also helps you get those last points of damage in because there comes to a point where you are running out of time because at a certain point people are going to get their plans online. And some of those plans will not particularly care whether or not you've goaded their entire board or not. I'm thinking of like some kind of aristocrats combo. I'm thinking of, infinite turns combo. Anything that doesn't really play to the board or plays to the board almost too well, right? A huge landfall combo, for example, will eventually overtake you if you can't finish the game. So at a certain point, you need to be the one that does that final attack to take out their opponents because they're going to be politicking to get out of those last attacks. Because if I'm facing 3 opponents and one of them is close to death and the other 2 are goaded, if I were them, I would tell the others, listen, keep me alive, and I'll get rid of this goaded nonsense. I'll get rid of this forced battle stuff. And with that in mind, I think you need to be the ones to do the final hits, and Frontier Warmonger giving you menace across the board just enables that a little more. Her being a 4/4 as well is nothing to scoff at. I think these are good things. All right, one more thing on damage, and this one is Solfim. Now, I'm realizing after saying this, it's only your damage, so maybe I should have thought of something else. And perhaps the answer is actually, and I want to make sure you're not playing it. Let's say flash double in red. Maybe the answer is actually Dictate of the Twin Gods instead. Solifim is good because it just doubles your damage and is a relatively good card. But I think maybe you'd prefer Dictate. It is 5 mana, but this does universally go across the board. Alternatively, you could play one of the big demons that is a creature, which I don't think you're playing. Um, Demon. I just saw this. I think it's the one with the can't gain life. Gain life. Text. Oh, whoops. I put those in the wrong sections. Archfiend of Despair is probably the one I'm thinking of, where this is at the beginning of each end step, your opponents take all the damage that they've taken again. This is a much easier way to do this, like because it's a creature and you could reanimate it. So maybe I'll suggest Archfiend of Despair. Being able to stop the life gain is pretty relevant, but the main reason you have this here is that once you play this, all of the combat damage your opponents are doing to each other gets doubled. And it is a giant 6/6 flying demon. Now, this is going to come into my adjust to my final point I want to make. I think you could play a little more reanimate because a card like Archfiend of Despair is 8 mana, but if you can have Chainer out, if you can play right now you have Entomb Reanimate, and if you can get Archfiend of Despair out, it comes out, it has haste, it attacks one of your opponent, notwithstanding any other creatures you have in play. Nothing else attacks. Archfiend of Despair by itself in that situation does 12 damage. I think that's fantastic. If we add in all of the other cards that you're probably playing, if we add in Lightning Ragers, if we add in, the menace that we have on our creatures, this gets ridiculously powerful. With the goad, when you go to your opponent's turn, you just let them go at it. And you know what? The thing that's really interesting is that your opponents are almost de-incentivized to destroy this creature until after their combat, right? Because if I was goaded and this is in play and I had like Swords to Plowshares, I would definitely attack first, right? I would attack first, I would go to the end step, I would let that damage be mirrored, and only then would I consider removing this creature, right? And even then, I might not remove it until other opponents attack me. Like the fact that the damage against my other opponents is doubled is a huge boon for my for just like a bystander deck. So Archfiend of Despair is looking really good the more I talk about it. And to get it out, I would really like you to be also playing Unmarked Grave, which is an Entomb for 2 mana, but it cannot hit legendaries, which is important to note because a lot of your creatures are legendaries. But I guess one of the problems is maybe you were playing too many legendaries and that you can't get away with that. And if so, you should be playing Buried Alive, sorry. Play Buried Alive, and then after which, so you can't play Persist for the same reason. So let's play Animate Dead instead. Just as another card that reanimates, yeah, your creature loses a little power, but they gain haste, and the creatures that you can get are really meaningful. Especially cards like Sisters of the Dead, Drana, these cards that represent putting more creatures into play from your graveyard by themselves, so that you can go Buried Alive and then Animate Dead or Reanimate to get, you get Drana and well, this is on attack. Let me see. Is Sisters Undead on attack too? Yeah, they're both on attack, which I don't love, but still, you will get this creature. It will gain haste. It'll attack immediately. You will then get a second creature out of your graveyard onto the battlefield, and I think that's really powerful. And just being able to buy back a number of your creatures is going to be very meaningful. So having access to Animate Dead and Buried Alive, just for a few more numbers, is going to be good. And Buried Alive, once again, is just really nice because it just straight up works with Chainer. Okay, I think that's generally the things I have to say of this deck. I really do like it. I think it's got a lot of strength in its, especially in its top end of creatures, and your non-creature spells are really good. I think I think if you really wanted to change up the deck a little further, I think the next step after the things I've suggested would be to be a lot more critical with the creatures, because I think there's sharper creatures you could pick. I don't think they would be as cool, and I think you would definitely lose some cards, creatures for corner cases, but you could definitely pick up stronger, heavier creatures that, just punch face so much harder, but don't do anything besides that, right? I'm thinking of cards like well, I'm not gonna go into examples now because I won't stop. But something to consider. There's a lot of creatures that could do the job of beating your opponents down to death, like the 7/6 undead dinosaur, or the zombie dinosaur. That just like they aren't fancy though. They're no Yahenni. They're no Delina. They're just big beaters, and there might be some merit to playing them. You will have to decide yourself. I hope this deck assist was helpful to you. If you have another draft of this deck, I would love to see it. Or any draft of any deck, there is a link in the YouTube video description below. And if you'd like to skip the line and ensure your deck is the next one that I do, there is also a link to that in the description below as well. If you could like, comment, subscribe, do that whole thing, that would be incredibly helpful. I was just watching a video of a friend of mine who reached an absurd amount of subscribers, and he was reminding me that there's a bell you're supposed to ring. I think I'm supposed to tell you to ring a bell. I don't really understand YouTube. I'm trapped in a room, and I'm just here for the decks. All right, I look forward to seeing the next draft of this deck, and I wish you luck.